When you think of Queen Elizabeth I, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For most of us, it's this idea of a golden age in English history. You know, a time of Shakespeare, of incredible exploration, of glorious victory. But was it really all that golden for everyone? That's what we're going to dig into.
These are the words that made her a legend, right? She supposedly said this to her troops with the massive Spanish Armada sailing to attack. It's this perfect image of a fearless queen, a true national icon. And this speech, whether it happened exactly that way or not, became absolutely central to her whole mythos.
And, well, that's the thing about powerful legends. They have a way of editing out the messy parts. The real story of Elizabethan England is way more complex and, honestly, way more interesting than just the highlight reel we all learned in school. All right, so first up, let's dive into the legend itself. The legend of Gloriana, this story of a glorious queen ruling over an age of just incredible triumph. It's a version of history that has totally captivated people for centuries.
And you can see why the term golden age seems to fit so perfectly. I mean, it was this amazing cultural renaissance. You've got playwrights like William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe literally changing literature forever. At the exact same time, you have explorers like Sir Francis Drake sailing around the entire globe, taking on the mighty Spanish Empire on the high seas.
And this timeline, it really shows you how that legend got built, brick by brick. She starts by bringing some religious stability. Then you have these amazing feats of exploration, the stunning, almost unbelievable defeat of the Spanish Armada, and then the opening of the Globe Theater. These milestones create this powerful, straightforward story of national success. But here's the twist. This whole golden age, it wasn't some happy accident. As we're about to see, it was, in a lot of ways, a royal makeover, an incredible piece of political marketing, a very deliberately crafted image. The Elizabethan court used basically every tool in the propaganda playbook. You had portraits packed with symbols of power and purity sent all across Europe. Poets and playwrights were, let's say, encouraged to sing her praises, and every single victory was spun not just as a military win, but as solid proof that God was on their side. This is just brilliant political maneuvering. She took what could have been a huge weakness, being an unmarried female ruler in that era, and turned it into her greatest strength. By saying she was married to England, she became this kind of mother to her people, a figure of pure devotion who was above all the dirty politics of royal marriages. And this is a perfect example of that spin machine in action. After the Spanish Armada was defeated, thanks, by the way, in large part to some really terrible weather, Elizabeth had medals made with this message. The meaning was crystal clear. This wasn't just England's navy winning. This was God himself giving a thumbs up to Protestant England. And this image-making, it was literally skin deep. As Elizabeth got older, her face was scarred by a nasty bout of smallpox. So she used this thick, white lead makeup and a striking red wig. Think of it like a Tudor-era marketing campaign, designed to project this image of an ageless, almost immortal queen, hiding any sign of weakness or, being human. Okay, so now, let's pull back that very carefully constructed curtain. Because behind it, we find a very, very different reality. One that was a long, long way from golden for most of the people living in England at the time. And this simple question is where the myth really starts to crumble. We all celebrate the sailors who defeated the most powerful navy on the planet. But have you ever stopped to ask, what was their reward for that heroism? And the answer is just grim. The war had totally drained the treasury, and the crown basically just refused to pay its sailors. They were abandoned. They were left to die. In fact, her own chief advisor, William Cecil, pretty much said, hey, if the men die from sickness, at least we don't have to pay them. Can you even imagine? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The constant wars created a huge economic crisis. The population was exploding, but bad harvests meant there were food shortages and prices went through the roof. The poor were punished cruelly just for begging, and hundreds of Catholics were executed for their faith. This was the dark reality for millions. You also have to understand that society was incredibly rigid. This idea, the great chain of being, basically put everyone in a fixed spot. God was at the top, then the queen, then the nobles, and way, way down were the common people. If you were born a poor farmer, you died a poor farmer. End of story. And what about that glorious new empire everyone talks about? Well, as this writer Richard Hakluyt was complaining at the time, it didn't really exist. Failed colonies like the famous lost colony of Roanoke were what actually happened.
Historians have a great name for it, an empire nowhere. It was an idea that sounded a lot better than it was in practice during her reign.
So this all leads to a really big question for historians. Just how much power did Elizabeth as a woman actually have? Was she the real mastermind calling all the shots, or was she more of a figurehead for the powerful men on her council? You've got these two camps, right? On one side, historians like Susan Doran see her as this charismatic and hands-on ruler. But on the other side, scholars like Patrick Collinson argue England was more like a monarchical republic, basically run by this council of powerful dudes like William Cecil, who were the ones really driving policy. The key takeaway is that her authority was always being tested and negotiated.
And you just can't forget the world she was living in. It was deeply, deeply patriarchal. I mean, listen to this quote from the very influential Protestant reformer John Knox. He's saying that the idea of a woman ruling is just plain unnatural. Elizabeth faced that kind of thinking her entire life, just because she was a woman in a man's world.
Okay, so how do we make sense of all this? How do we reconcile these two completely different pictures? You have the dazzling myth of Gloriana on one hand, and the dark, grim reality of a tarnished age on the other. This table really just lays it all out, side by side. For every shiny, celebrated part of the legend, there's a corresponding, and often brutal, reality. That amazing cultural boom with Shakespeare, it happened alongside crushing poverty. The glorious Armada victory was immediately followed by the national shame of letting its heroes die. And that grand idea of an empire, well, it was mostly just a dream for later generations. So, at the end of the day, the Golden Age wasn't a total lie, but man, was it a well-managed story. It was a brilliant piece of propaganda that focused everyone's attention on the wins while sweeping the deep-seated problems under the rug. And honestly, the fact that we're still talking about it this way, that just shows you how powerful and how successful that political branding really was. And that kind of leaves us with one last big question, doesn't it? When we look back at any celebrated era in history, how much of it is real and how much is just a really great story that nations and their leaders tell about themselves? It's a question worth asking, not just about Elizabeth's time, but maybe about our own too.